Leo Kensington leaned back in his leather chair, rubbing his temple as his mother's voice droned through the speakerphone. He had known this conversation was coming. He had known this conversation was coming. Hell, he had been dodging it for months. Leo, sweetheart, you're turning 33 next month, Evelyn Kensington said with a saccharine tone that did little to mask her underlying demand. Your father and I are concerned. A man of your status should have settled down by now. Leo sighed, swirling the whiskey in his glass. Mom, I've told you, I don't have time for marriage. Between work, meetings, and excuses, she cut him off sharply. Your father is already discussing rewriting the inheritance terms, and I don't want you caught off guard. He wants stability, a legacy. If you don't show some commitment, he might start considering your cousin Patrick as a more responsible heir. Leo nearly choked on his drink. Patrick, that conniving little snake, over his dead body. You're telling me Dad is willing to hand over Kensington Holdings just because I'm not married? You know how he is, Evelyn said, her voice softening, almost as if she sympathized. Appearances matter, and he believes a married man looks more trustworthy, stable. He wants an heir to the family name. Leo pinched the bridge of his nose. This was a nightmare. And what exactly do you expect me to do? Pull a wife out of thin air? Darling, you're rich, handsome, and intelligent. If you can close billion-dollar deals, surely finding a wife isn't beyond your capabilities. Evelyn teased, I expect to meet her at your birthday gala next month. And just like that, she hung up, leaving Leo staring at the phone in disbelief. An irritated growl escaped his lips as he stood pacing toward the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse. The city skyline stretched before him, glittering with lights, but for the first time, it did nothing to soothe his mood. He had 30 days to find a wife. 30 days. By the next morning, he was sitting across from Mason Cole, his best friend and the only person who might have a ridiculous solution to his ridiculous problem. So let me get this straight, Mason said, stirring his coffee with a lazy grin. You need a wife, not a real one, just someone to convince your parents you've magically turned into husband material overnight. Leo exhaled, rubbing his jaw. You make it sound dumber than it is. Oh no, it's definitely that dumb. Mason smirked. But also kinda genius. A contract marriage. It's been done before in movies. This isn't a damn rom-com, Mason. Fooled me, Mason said with a chuckle, before taking a sip of his coffee. So, do you want a classy socialite? An actress? I know a few models. No. Leo shook his head. Too risky. I need someone who won't get attached. Someone who won't screw this up. Mason leaned back. A thoughtful look crossing his face. Then, suddenly, he snapped his fingers. I might have the perfect person. Leo arched an eyebrow. Oh, you remember Riley Carter? Leo frowned, trying to place the name. Mason grinned. Tomboy, owns a garage, fixes cars better than half the guys in the city. Grew up in Maple Ridge with 3 older brothers who treat her like a military recruit. Leo vaguely remembered a scrappy girl Mason used to mention in college. Someone who never took crap from anyone. And you think she'd agree to this insane idea? Mason shrugged. She needs money. Her dad passed away last year, left her the garage, but she's struggling to keep it running. Banks aren't loaning to small businesses, and she refuses to take handouts. Leo rubbed his chin. She sounds stubborn. She is. But she also has zero interest in love and relationships. And considering your plan, isn't that exactly what you need? Leo considered this. A woman who wasn't looking for romance, who needed money, and who wasn't intimidated by his wealth. It was almost too perfect. Where can I find her? Mason smirked. Oh, I'll take you to her. But be warned, she's not the type to swoon over a billionaire. You might have to work for this one. Later that evening, Leo found himself stepping out of his sleek black car in front of Carter's Auto Repair. The garage smelled of oil and metal, and the sound of oil and metal, and the sound of an engine revving filled the air. And there she was. Riley Carter stood next to a car, wiping grease off her hands with a rag. Her auburn hair was tied back in a messy ponytail, and she wore a faded t-shirt and cargo pants. Despite the dirt on her skin, her sharp green eyes locked onto him with immediate suspicion. Mason grinned, clapping Leo's shoulder. Riley, meet Leo Kensington. Leo, meet the toughest woman I know. Riley crossed her arms. What do you want, Kensington? Straight to the point. Leo could respect that. I have a business proposition for you, he said coolly. She lifted an eyebrow. I don't fix spoiled rich boys' cars. Leo smirked. I'm not here for a car. I need a wife. Silence. Then Riley snorted. You sure you came to the right place? Mason chuckled. Hear him out. Riley leaned against the workbench, arms still crossed. Fine. Make it quick. Leo took a measured breath. I need a wife for 1 year. A contract marriage. No romance, no real attachment. Just enough to satisfy my parents. You get a generous paycheck, and after a year, we part ways. Riley stared at him like he'd grown a second head. You rich people are weird. Leo chuckled. Probably. She shook her head. Why me? You need money for your shop. I need someone who won't fall in love with me. He smirked. You seem immune to charm. Riley scoffed. Damn right. There was a long pause. She chewed on her lip, clearly debating. Leo could see the wheels turning in her mind. Finally, she sighed. You're serious about this? Dead serious. She exhaled. And I'd be free after a year? Absolutely. Another pause. Then, to his surprise, she held out her grease-stained hand. Fine. But if you break any of the rules, I'll break your nose. I'll break your nose. Leo grinned, taking her hand in his. Deal. Leo Kensington sat across from Riley Carter in his penthouse office, a sleek, modern space overlooking the city skyline. The contract lay on the glass table between them, printed in crisp black ink, spelling out the terms of their unusual arrangement. He had expected her to skim through it, maybe raise an eyebrow or two. Instead, she was reading every single word, her fingers tapping against the table impatiently. No physical contact, she murmured, eyes scanning the page. Not even a casual hug? Leo smirked. leaning back in his chair. Do you want casual hugs? Riley shot him a look. Just making sure you know the rules. Oh, I do. He rested an elbow on the armrest. You're the one who demanded them. She huffed, flipping to the next page. Good, because if you so much as try anything, I'll introduce your pretty face to my wrench. Leo chuckled. Noted. The truth was, he didn't mind her rules. In fact, they made things easier. If they both kept their emotional distance, this would remain exactly what it was, a business deal. He didn't need complications. Riley finished reading and leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. So what's the next step, boss? Leo slid a pen toward her. You sign, we shake hands, and then I spend the next month making you look like a billionaire's wife instead of someone who can deadlift a car engine. Her green eyes narrowed. Excuse me? He smirked. You might need a little refinement. Riley snatched the pen and scrawled her signature aggressively. Leo's smirk widened. So do I. But my parents? They expect a Kensington wife. That means designer dresses, social events, and at least pretending to enjoy champagne. Riley groaned, slamming the pen down. I don't even own a dress. Leo stood, buttoning his suit jacket. That's why I'm taking you shopping. 2 hours later, Riley was standing in the middle of a luxury boutique, looking like she wanted to set everything on fire. This is ridiculous, she muttered under her breath as a stylist hovered nearby, holding up a soft pink cocktail dress. Why does everything have to be so? Leo stood beside her, arms crossed, amusement dancing in his eyes. It's a dress, Riley, not a death sentence. She shot him a glare. I feel naked in this thing. You're wearing a jumpsuit, not a bikini. Riley looked down at the designer piece, her nose scrunching in disapproval. I don't do frills, Kensington. Leo sighed. He expected resistance, but she acted like he was forcing her into battle armor. Fine, no frills. Pick something you can tolerate, but it has to look expensive. She scowled. Define expensive. Leo gestured around them. Anything not in the clearance section. Riley exhaled sharply, then grabbed a sleek black dress with no embellishments. It's simple. No lace, no glitter. Leo studied it. That works. The stylist, a tiny woman with thick-rimmed glasses, clapped her hands. Now heels. Riley groaned. Leo grinned. Relax. I'll even let you pick the least painful ones. She muttered something about rich people's torture methods before begrudgingly letting the stylist measure her for shoes. As she stepped onto the fitting platform, she caught Leo watching her, his head tilted slightly, like he was seeing something new. What? She asked, crossing her arms. He shrugged. Nothing. It wasn't nothing. For a second, he had seen past the grease-stained shirts and the combat boots. Standing there, her hair falling over one shoulder, a stubborn fire in her eyes, she looked like she belonged here, like she could be the kind of woman his parents expected. Not that he'd ever tell her that. By the time they left the boutique, Riley was armed with multiple outfits, a few pairs of shoes, and a permanent scowl. This is not what I signed up for, she grumbled as Leo held the door open for her. You signed up to be my wife. This is part of the package. Your fake wife, she corrected, which means I shouldn't have to suffer through this. Leo smirked. Suffering builds character. Riley shot him a look as they slid into his car. So does punching you. Leo only laughed. That evening, Leo took her to one of the city's most exclusive restaurants for their first public appearance. It wasn't an official announcement, but the moment they stepped inside, cameras flashed. News travels fast, Riley muttered under her breath, keeping her expression neutral. Leo placed a hand lightly on her back, guiding her forward. Smile, Mrs. Kensington. Her eyes flicked up to his, and for a split second she hesitated. It was the first time he had used her new name, and it felt strange. They reached their private table, tucked into a corner of the restaurant with a stunning view of the city. Riley exhaled, shaking off the nerves. I hate fancy food, she mumbled, unfolding her napkin. Leo smirked. You hate everything fancy. She sighed. Yeah, it's exhausting. He chuckled, lifting his wine glass. You'll get used to it. Riley picked up her own glass and swirled it, eyeing the deep red liquid suspiciously. Cabernet Sauvignon. Her brow furrowed. Why does it smell like it wants to kill me? Leo laughed, shaking his head. Just take a sip. She did, and immediately gagged. What the hell is this? Vinegar? Leo was actually wheezing. It's wine, Riley. This is horrible, he grinned. You're lucky you're cute when you're angry. She scowled, setting the glass down with a thud. I am not cute. Leo leaned forward, amusement still playing on his lips. You are when you're trying to act like you don't belong here. Riley's stomach flipped, an unfamiliar reaction that she immediately shoved aside. I don't belong here, she muttered, looking away. Leo's smirk faded slightly. Then let's change that. For a moment, there was silence. The city lights reflected in the window beside them, casting a warm glow over their table. Riley tapped her fingers against her thigh. This whole thing is insane. Leo raised his glass. A toast to insanity, then. She rolled her eyes, but lifted her water glass anyway, clinking it against his. To insanity. Their eyes met over the rim, and for the first time since they had signed that ridiculous contract, Riley felt a shift. Like maybe, just maybe, this wasn't going to be as simple as they thought. Riley barely had time to breathe before she was thrown into what could only be described as billionaire boot camp. If she thought signing the contract was the hard part, she was dead wrong. That was just the warm-up. Day one started with etiquette training, a phrase that made her want to hurl a wrench at Leo's head. This is ridiculous, she muttered as she sat stiffly in the ornate chair inside one of the Kensington estate's many lavish dining rooms. Across from her sat Clarissa Monroe, an older woman who had probably never seen a grease stain in her life, staring at Riley like she was a stray dog that had wandered in from the street. Miss Carter, Clarissa began, voice clipped and formal. Riley slouched just to be difficult. Clarissa's lips thinned. Straighten your back. Riley groaned, but obeyed. Chin up. She lifted her chin. Shoulders back. Jesus, am I training for a military parade or a fake marriage? Riley grumbled under her breath. Leo, who was lounging nearby with an amused smirk, spoke up. If you don't want her to correct your posture, don't slouch like an old man. Riley shot him a glare that could have melted steel. I hate you. Leo grinned. No, you don't. Clarissa cleared her throat, clearly unimpressed by their dynamic. Now, we shall move on to table manners. She gestured toward the absurdly large dining tables, set with more silverware than Riley had ever seen in her life. Why the hell do you need 3 different forks? Riley asked, picking one up and twirling it in her fingers. Clarissa looked horrified. That is not a toy. Leo chuckled. That one's for salads. And this one? Riley picked up another fork. Main course. And this tiny one? Dessert. Riley stared at him like he had just told her the earth was flat. Or, and hear me out, we could use one fork for everything, like a normal person. Clarissa audibly gasped, Miss Carter, there are rules. Riley rolled her eyes but begrudgingly put the forks down. Fine, teach me, oh wise one. Leo leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, watching as Clarissa painstakingly walked Riley through the horrors of high society dining. By the time they reached the subject of which spoon to use for soup, Riley's soul had all but left her body. Leo, the smug bastard, found it endlessly entertaining. By the 3rd day, Riley had survived etiquette lessons, shopping sprees, and an entire seminar on how to walk in heels without looking like a baby deer on ice. But the worst part, Vanessa. She showed up at the Kensington estate like a hurricane in stilettos, all designer perfume and manufactured charm. Riley had never met her before, but the second Vanessa's perfectly lined eyes landed on her, she knew she was in for trouble. This is the woman you're marrying. Vanessa drawled, stepping closer to Leo with an exaggerated pout. Leo, darling, tell me you're joking. Riley folded her arms, already irritated. I'm standing right here, lady. Vanessa barely spared her a glance. Yes, I can see that. It's just surprising. Her gaze traveled over Riley's outfit. Jeans and a leather jacket, a stark contrast to Vanessa's fitted designer dress. Leo sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Vanessa, I don't remember inviting you. Oh, darling, she purred, sliding closer to him in a way that made Riley's stomach turn. I don't need an invitation. Riley clenched her jaw, biting back a sarcastic remark. This wasn't real. Vanessa wasn't her problem. Except, judging by the way Vanessa was eyeing her like a cockroach that had invaded her luxury penthouse, it was her problem. So, Vanessa said, turning her attention back to Riley. Riley smirked. Leo needed a mechanic. I fixed his car. He fell madly in love with my grease-stained hands. Leo choked on his drink. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. Funny, Vanessa said coolly. You don't seem like Leo's type. And you don't seem like someone who understands personal space. Riley shot back. Leo coughed, barely suppressing a laugh. Ladies, Vanessa plastered on a fake smile. Oh, honey, I just hope you know what you're getting into. Riley grinned, tilting her head. I could say the same to you. Vanessa's expression darkened, but before she could retort, Leo smoothly placed a hand on Riley's lower back. It wasn't much, just a light touch, but it sent a jolt through her system. I think we're done here, Leo said. Vanessa, always a pleasure. Vanessa huffed, but didn't argue. With one last scathing look at Riley, she turned on her heel and strutted out the door. As soon as she was gone, Riley exhaled. She's delightful. Leo smirked. She's persistent. You dated that? Unfortunately. Riley shook her head. Your taste is questionable. Leo chuckled. And yet I picked you. Riley blinked, caught off guard. But before she could process that statement, Leo was already walking away. Damn it! Why did her fake husband have to be so dangerously charming? Later that evening, Riley sat on the couch in Leo's penthouse, absently flipping through a magazine while he worked across the room. I still don't understand why your parents think I need to be some refined, delicate flower, she muttered, tossing the magazine aside. Isn't it more believable if I just act like myself? Leo looked up from his laptop. Because they expect perfection. Newsflash, Kensington. I am not perfect. He smirked. No kidding. Riley threw a cushion at him. He caught it effortlessly, laughing. I'm serious, she said, sitting up. You don't actually think I can pull this off, do you? Leo studied her for a moment before leaning back in his chair. You already are. Riley frowned. What? He shrugged. You're handling all of this better than I expected. My mother actually likes you. That's a miracle. She scoffed. She doesn't even know me. Leo tilted his head. Maybe not, but I do. Riley's stomach did that weird flipping thing again. She hated it. Clearing her throat, she grabbed the remote and turned on the TV, deliberately ignoring whatever just passed between them. Fake. Fake. It was all fake. So why did it feel like anything but? Riley stared at her reflection in the massive gold-framed mirror of the bridal suite, feeling like she had stepped into an alternate universe. The woman staring back at her was unrecognizable. She had fought against wearing anything overly extravagant, but the stylists had worked their magic. The dress was simple but elegant, an off-the-shoulder satin gown that hugged her curves in all the right places, the fabric flowing effortlessly down to the floor. Her auburn hair, usually tied up in a messy ponytail, was now in soft waves cascading down her back. She looked bridal, which was completely insane because this wasn't real. Behind her, Zara, Mason's longtime friend and her reluctant etiquette coach, grinned. Damn, Carter, you clean up real nice. Riley scowled at her through the mirror. Shut up. Zara laughed, but before she could tease more, Mason appeared in the doorway, looking slightly too entertained by the entire situation. I come bearing news, he announced. Riley sighed. If it's about another last-minute wedding tradition I need to follow, I don't want to hear it. Nope, it's about your groom. Mason smirked. Leo looks like he might pass out. That got her attention. What? Mason leaned against the doorframe. Yep. Mr. Cool and Collected is currently standing at the altar, looking like he's about to bolt. Riley snorted. Well, this should be fun. Zara clapped her hands. All right, lovebirds, let's get this over with before one of you runs. With a deep breath, Riley turned and grabbed her bouquet, a carefully curated arrangement of white roses, hand-picked by Evelyn Kensington. Of course, she felt the weight of everything hit her then, the absurdity of it. She was about to walk down the aisle, say I do, and kiss Leo Kensington in front of hundreds of people, all for a contract. All right, she muttered under her breath. Let's do this. Leo stood at the altar, adjusting his cufflinks for the 100th time. He was fine, totally fine, except for the part where he felt like he was being hunted. The massive cathedral was packed with guests, his parents' business associates, family friends, and more high society socialites than he cared to count. He recognized faces from magazines, from boardrooms, from parties he had barely tolerated in the past. They were all here for him, waiting for this grand spectacle to unfold. And the worst part, he had no idea why his heart was hammering in his chest. It wasn't nerves. He didn't get nervous. Yet, when the music shifted and the massive wooden doors at the end of the aisle opened, he felt his breath catch. And then he saw her. Riley Carter, his fake bride. And for a moment, she didn't look fake at all. She walked toward him, her steps slow and steady, her green eyes locked onto his. The dress was simple, nothing overly extravagant, and yet it suited her in a way that made something in his chest tighten. The sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows cast an ethereal glow around her, like something out of a dream. Leo swallowed hard. What the hell was wrong with him? Mason nudged his elbow. Breathe, man. Leo ignored him, forcing himself to keep his expression neutral. Riley finally reached the altar, and as he took her hand, warm, steady, and slightly calloused from years of working on cars, he felt a jolt of something he refused to name. You good? She whispered, raising an eyebrow. Leo cleared his throat. Fine. You? She smirked. Peachy. The officiant began speaking, but Leo barely heard a word. All he could focus on was Riley, standing there, looking like she belonged in his world, despite every attempt to convince herself otherwise. And then, before he knew it, it was time for the vows. Leo Kensington, the officiant prompted. Do you take Riley Carter to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer, till death do you part? Leo looked at Riley. Contract, business deal, nothing more. But in that moment, looking at her, his throat felt dry. I do. Riley's expression flickered, just for a split second, before she regained her usual smirk. And do you, Riley Carter, take Leo Kensington to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer, till death do you part? Riley held his gaze. Something unspoken passed between them. Then, with a soft sigh, she said, I do. The words settled between them, heavier than they should have been. The officiant smiled. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Leo hesitated, just for a second, before lifting her veil. Riley met his eyes. They had agreed it would be quick, a simple, chaste kiss for show. But the moment his lips met hers, something shifted. The crowd faded. The contract faded. Everything else ceased to exist. Riley's lips were soft, warm, and he had expected her to pull away immediately, but she didn't, and neither did he. It wasn't just a kiss, it was something more, something dangerously close to real. When they finally broke apart, Riley was staring at him, slightly breathless. Leo felt the same. But before either of them could say anything, the applause erupted. It was done. They were married. By the time they reached the reception, Riley had already abandoned her heels. "I swear those things are a death trap," she muttered, downing a glass of champagne like it was a shot. Leo smirked. "You lasted longer than I expected." She rolled her eyes. "Don't get used to it." The ballroom was extravagant. Chandeliers, crystal glasses, live music, everything. Everything Evelyn Kensington had dreamed of. And yet, Leo found himself ignoring it all, because all he could focus on was Riley. The way she had slipped into this world so seamlessly, the way she had held his gaze during the ceremony, the way she had kissed him back. Mason appeared beside him, grinning. "You guys actually look like a real couple up there." Leo scoffed. "We are a real couple." Mason chuckled. Yeah, sure." He patted Leo's shoulder. "Just be careful, man." Leo frowned. "Careful of what?" Mason shrugged. "Lines blur fast, and that kiss didn't exactly scream strictly business." Leo opened his mouth to argue, but he couldn't, because Mason was right. And that was a problem. The first night of their marriage was supposed to be uneventful. That was the plan. A contract marriage meant clear boundaries, separate rooms, no complications. But Riley Carter was quickly realizing that nothing about this arrangement felt simple anymore. She stood in the middle of Leo Kensington's penthouse, barefoot, dress discarded in favor of sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt she had stolen from his closet. The city skyline glittered beyond the floor to ceiling windows, but her mind wasn't on the view. It was on him. Leo had disappeared into his office after the reception, claiming he had business to attend to, leaving Riley alone with her thoughts, and that damn kiss replaying in her head. It had been too much, too long, too intense, too real. She had told herself it was just for show, just a performance for the hundreds of guests watching. But the way her heart had pounded, the way she had felt warm under his touch, it had messed with her. With an irritated sigh, she grabbed a can of soda from the fridge and flopped onto the couch, determined to push it all aside. That lasted about 2 minutes, because then Leo strolled into the room, freshly showered, barefoot, and wearing only a loose t-shirt and sweatpants, looking entirely too comfortable for someone who had just gotten fake married. Riley scowled at him. "Do you always walk around half dressed like that?" Leo smirked, leaning against the counter. "Do you always steal my clothes?" "Fair trade," she muttered, taking a sip of her drink. Leo chuckled, moving to sit in the chair across from her. He stretched out, looking far too relaxed. "So, how does it feel?" She raised an eyebrow. "How does what feel?" "Being Mrs. Kensington." Riley snorted. "Weird." Leo tilted his head. "Weird how?" She thought for a moment, tapping her fingers against the soda can. We just pulled off a massive con in front of half the city. And the scary part, I think I almost believed it myself. Leo's expression shifted slightly, like he understood exactly what she meant. Yeah, he said, voice quieter. I know what you mean. The room settled into a silence that felt heavier than it should have. Riley cleared her throat. Anyway, we're married now. Yay us! She waved her hands sarcastically. What's next? Do I have to start wearing pearls and hosting charity galas? Leo smirked. Not yet, but you do have to move in. She nearly choked on her drink. Excuse me. Riley, my parents aren't stupid. If we're living separately, it won't take long before they start questioning things. She groaned, rubbing her temples. So now I have to live with you? Leo shrugged. Think of it as a free upgrade. Penthouse, fancy food, a closet bigger than your entire apartment. She shot him a glare. Do not touch my apartment. That place is mine. He smirked. Relax, Carter. I wouldn't dare. Riley sighed. Fine. I'll move in. She pointed a finger at him. But separate rooms. I'm not waking up to your smug face every morning. Leo placed a hand over his heart. You wound me. She rolled her eyes, already regretting every life decision that had led her here. By the next morning, her life was officially unrecognizable. Moving into Leo's penthouse meant stepping into a world that was the complete opposite of her own. Everything was too clean, too organized, too pristine. Her entire auto shop could fit in the walk, in closet alone. Mrs. Esme, Leo's housekeeper, bustled around, making sure everything was in order. Riley had expected the woman to be stiff and judgmental, but instead she was warm, motherly, and absolutely thrilled about the marriage. Mr. Kensington never brought home a woman before, Mrs. Esme said with a knowing smile as she unpacked Riley's bags. Riley crossed her arms. Yeah, well, first time for everything. Mrs. Esme just chuckled. You'll take good care of him, I can tell. Riley had no idea how to respond to that. Leo, of course, was completely unfazed by all of it. He acted like it was the most natural thing in the world for them to cohabitate, which only irritated Riley more. At breakfast, she slumped into a chair, arms crossed. So what's my schedule like as your perfect wife? Leo sipped his coffee. There's a charity gala this weekend. You'll be attending as my date. Riley groaned. You love torturing me. He smirked. You make it too easy. The rest of the day was filled with adjustments, learning where everything was, dealing with the press speculation, and, worst of all, dealing with Vanessa. The woman had called Leo twice already, and Riley was not in the mood. By evening, she was standing on the balcony, enjoying the city lights, when Leo appeared beside her. Vanessa called, she muttered. Leo sighed. I know. She's still in love with you, or just incredibly nosy? He smirked. Both. Riley snorted, shaking her head. Figures! For a moment, they just stood there, the cool breeze wrapping around them. Then Leo spoke. You okay? Riley frowned. Why wouldn't I be? This. Change. It's a lot. She exhaled, staring at the skyline. Yeah, it is. Leo studied her for a moment before reaching out, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. It was an unconscious gesture, but it sent a spark down Riley's spine. "You're handling it better than you think," he murmured. She swallowed. "That's so," he nodded. "Yeah." And for a second, just a second, she let herself believe it. That maybe, just maybe, this wasn't all a disaster waiting to happen. The break, it happened on a Tuesday. Riley had spent most of the afternoon at the auto shop, her first time back since moving into Leo's penthouse. She had told herself she was just checking in, making sure things were running smoothly. But the truth was she missed it. The scent of oil, the low hum of engines, the familiar rhythm of her life before everything had flipped upside down. She had just locked up for the night when she noticed something was off. The side door, the one that was always bolted shut, was slightly ajar. Her gut twisted. Riley wasn't the type to scare easily, but years of growing up with three protective older brothers had drilled instincts into her that she never ignored. She hesitated for half a second before pulling out the wrench she always kept in her bag. Quietly, she stepped inside. The shop was dark, silent, except for the distant hum of city traffic. Her boots barely made a sound as she moved deeper, scanning for anything out of place. Then she saw it. The filing cabinet was open, papers scattered across the floor. Someone had been looking for something. A noise, soft, almost imperceptible, came from the back. Riley's grip tightened around the wrench. "Whoever's here," she called out, her voice steady, "I suggest you leave before I introduce you to my favorite tool." Silence. Then a rush of movement. A shadow bolted from the back, heading straight for the exit. Riley reacted on instinct, lunging forward, but the figure was too fast. They crashed through the door and disappeared into the night. By the time she reached the alley, they were gone. Her heart pounded as she leaned against the doorway, trying to piece together what had just happened. A break. Not a robbery. Nothing was missing, except for whatever they had been looking for. And that scared her more than anything. Leo was on the phone when she got back to the penthouse, pacing in front of the window with his usual look of detached authority. "Handle it," he said smoothly before hanging up. When he turned and saw her, his brow furrowed. Riley tossed her bag onto the counter. "I was busy getting robbed." Leo froze. "What?" She crossed her arms, irritation bubbling beneath her skin. "Someone broke into the shop, didn't steal anything, just ransacked the place like they were looking for something." His entire demeanor changed in an instant. He was across the room before she could blink, his eyes sharp, controlled. But underneath it, there was something else, something almost dangerous. "Are you hurt?" "No," she said quickly, slightly thrown by the intensity in his voice. Leo exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Did you see them?" "Barely. Just a shadow. They ran before I could get a good look." He cursed under his breath and reached for his phone. "Whoo, whoo," Wally said, stepping in front of him. "Calling security. You need protection." She rolled her eyes. "I don't need protection, Leo. I can handle myself." He leveled her with a look. "Someone broke into your shop. They could have been waiting for you." Riley hated that he had a point. Still, The idea of bodyguards following her around made her skin itch. Leo must seen the resistance on her face because he sighed, lowering the phone. Fine, no full security detail, but at least take someone with you from now on. Like who? You? If I have to, she snorted. Leo Kensington, shadowing me while I change oil, that I'd pay to see. His lips twitched. I can pull off work boots. She shook her head, doubtful, but the moment of levity passed too quickly, because underneath their usual banter, something unspoken lingered. Leo was worried, and Riley wasn't sure how to feel about that. The messages started 2 days later. At first, she thought it was just a coincidence, a wrong number, but when she got the second, then the third, she knew it wasn't random. You don't belong in his world. Riley stared at the text, something cold curling in her stomach. The number was unknown. No profile picture, nothing to trace. She locked her phone and shoved it into her pocket, refusing to let it get to her. But it did. Because whoever was sending these messages wasn't just some internet troll. They knew exactly who she was. That night, Riley barely touched her dinner. She was quieter than usual, her mind replaying the words over and over. Leo noticed. "You're thinking too hard," he said, cutting into his steak. She blinked. "What?" "You do this thing," he said, gesturing toward her. "When something's bothering you, you zone out, like you're mentally punching something." Riley scoffed. "I always look like I'm mentally punching something." Leo smirked. "True, but this is different." She hesitated, debating whether to tell him. Then, before she could stop herself, she pulled out her phone and slid it across the table. Leo picked it up, his easygoing expression shifting the second he saw the message. The muscle in his jaw ticked. "Riley," he said, voice low, controlled. "Why didn't you tell me?" She shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "It's probably nothing." Leo exhaled sharply. "It's not nothing. This isn't just some anonymous hate message. This is a warning." Her stomach twisted. He was right. She just didn't want to admit it. Leo leaned back, tapping his fingers against the table, deep in thought. Then finally said, "You're staying here." Riley frowned. "I am staying here." "No," he said firmly. "I mean here. In the penthouse. No going to the shop alone. No late night errands. No exceptions." She scowled. "You can't just—" "I can," he interrupted, his voice uncharacteristically serious. "And I will." Riley opened her mouth to argue. But then she saw it. That look in his eyes. This wasn't about control. It was about fear. Not for himself. For her. And that realization did something to her chest. Something she didn't want to examine too closely. After a long pause, she sighed. "Fine." Leo nodded, satisfied. "Good." They sat in silence for a moment. Then, because she couldn't resist, she smirked. "You're bossy when you're worried." Leo huffed out a laugh. "You're insufferable." She grinned. "Takes one to know one." And just like that, the tension broke. But as she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, the words from that text echoed in her head. You don't belong in his world. She wasn't sure who had sent it, but she had a feeling this was only the beginning. Riley never thought she'd be the type of woman to have a bodyguard. Yet here she was, walking through the penthouse lobby with a 6'4" mountain of a man named Cole trailing behind her like a silent shadow. It had been a week since the break-in, a week since the text started, a week since Leo had put his foot down and declared she was not going anywhere alone. She had fought him on it, of course. But Leo being Leo, he had somehow convinced her that having someone around wasn't the worst idea. Still, that didn't mean she had to like it. I don't need a babysitter, she muttered as they stepped into the elevator. Cole didn't blink. Mr. Kensington insisted. Riley rolled her eyes. Of course he did. It wasn't just the bodyguard. Leo had doubled security at the penthouse, had surveillance installed at her shop, and had personally made sure that no one got within 10 feet of her without being screened. It was a lot. And the worst part, she didn't actually hate it. Because for the first time in a long time, someone was looking out for her. And that was dangerous. Because it meant Leo was getting under her skin. She didn't want to need him. Didn't want him. But the way he had reacted when he saw that text, the quiet rage in his eyes, the way he had immediately put her safety above everything else, it was messing with her head and her heart. By the time she got back to the penthouse, she was exhausted. She had spent the day at the auto shop trying to act normal, but the lingering paranoia wouldn't leave her alone. She didn't scare easily, but this, knowing someone was out there, watching, it unsettled her more than she cared to admit. She kicked off her boots, stretched her arms, and walked toward the kitchen, expecting silence. Instead, she found Leo. He was standing at the stove, sleeves rolled up, brow furrowed in concentration as he stirred something in a pan. Riley blinked. Are you cooking? Leo looked up, smirking. I do know how to feed myself, Carter. She snorted. Yeah? Sure. Rich boy survival skills 101. Microwaving caviar. Leo chuckled, shaking his head. Sit down. You look like you need a decent meal. Riley hesitated, then pulled out a chair. Pasta. Pasta. She raised an eyebrow. Impressive. I figured you'd have a chef hidden somewhere in this place. Leo plated the food and set it in front of her. I do. But I figured you'd like something normal for once. Riley stared at the plate, then back at him. Are you? She paused, narrowing her eyes. Are you taking care of me? Leo smirked, leaning against the counter. Someone has to. Her chest tightened. She hated how much she liked the sound of that. She picked up her fork, taking a bite. The moment the flavors hit her tongue, she groaned. Okay, damn. This is actually good. Leo grinned. Surprised? She chewed, nodding. Very. For a moment, they ate in comfortable silence. Then Riley exhaled, tapping her fingers against the table. Leo. He looked up. Yeah. She hesitated. Why are you doing all this? His expression shifted slightly, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. Because you're my wife. Her heart stuttered. But I'm not really. Doesn't matter, he cut her off. You're mine to protect. The words sent a shiver down her spine. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she didn't need saving. But the way he was looking at her, like he'd tear apart the world if it meant keeping her safe. She didn't want to fight that. And that terrified her, because this wasn't supposed to feel real. And yet it did. That weekend, Leo whisked her away to the lake house. Riley hadn't even known he had a lake house until he had thrown a duffel bag at her and told her to pack. The second they arrived, she understood why. It was stunning. Nestled deep in the woods, right on the water, with a massive wraparound deck and floor to ceiling windows. It was the kind of place that felt untouched by the world. Riley stood on the dock, staring at the water. Why do I feel like I just stepped into a Hallmark movie? Leo chuckled. I don't bring many people here. She turned to him. Why not? He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. It was my mother's favorite place. She always said it was the only place where my father didn't think about business. Riley softened. She sounds like a smart woman. Leo's lips quirked. She is. A beat of silence passed. Then Riley smirked. Okay, so what's the plan? You gonna make me go fishing or something? Leo grinned. Would you even know what to do with a fishing rod? Please, she scoffed. I grew up with 3 brothers. I can fish you and drink you. Leo raised an eyebrow. Challenge accepted. By sunset, they were sitting by the fire pit, a bottle of whiskey between them, the lake stretching out like glass. Riley took a sip, then tilted her head. Okay, I'll admit, this was a good idea. Leo smirked. Told you. She nudged his shoulder. Don't get cocky. They fell into silence, the crackling fire the only sound between them. Then Leo spoke. Do you ever think about what happens after this? Riley stilled. She knew what he meant. After the contract. After the year was up. She looked at him, the firelight casting shadows across his face. I try not to. Leo's jaw tightened. Yeah. The air between them changed. Because for the first time, neither of them wanted to acknowledge what was becoming obvious. That this wasn't just a contract anymore. That maybe, just maybe, they didn't want it to end. But neither of them said it. Instead, Riley leaned back, staring at the stars. For now, she let herself pretend. Riley knew something was off the moment she stepped into the penthouse. The air felt different. Tense, charged with something she couldn't quite put her finger on. She dropped her bag by the door, scanning the room. Leo stood by the floor, to ceiling window, his phone clenched tightly in his hand, his jaw locked in a way that told her something was very, very wrong. She closed the door behind her, crossing her arms. All right, what happened? Leo didn't turn around immediately. Instead, he exhaled slowly, as if trying to suppress the rage simmering beneath the surface. When he finally faced her, his eyes were cold. Vanessa went to the press. Riley blinked. And he bit out, tossing his phone onto the coffee table. She told them everything. A sick feeling curled in her stomach. She snatched the phone, scrolling through the news article on the screen. Billionaire Leo Kensington's perfect marriage. Is it just a business deal? Her pulse pounded in her ears as she skimmed the article. It was all there, the timeline of their relationship, the suspiciously fast wedding, even a supposed source who claimed Riley was nothing more than a gold digger, hired to play the role of a dutiful wife. And the worst part? Vanessa had somehow found out about the money Leo had funneled into Riley's auto shop. Her throat went dry. Leo, I know, he said, running a hand through his hair. I should have told you. Riley sucked in a breath, her fingers tightening around the phone. Damn right you should told me. Leo exhaled sharply. I wasn't trying to control you, Riley. I just wanted to help. But you didn't tell me, she snapped. Do you have any idea how this looks? Like I actually married you for money. Like I was. She cut herself off, bile rising in her throat. Leo stepped toward her. It's not true, and you know it. That doesn't matter, she burst out. What matters is that everyone else thinks it is. Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Then, in a quieter voice, she asked, Did you really think I couldn't take care of myself? Leo's expression softened. No, I know you can. Then why? He hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. And for the first time since she met him, Leo Kensington looked unsure. Because I wanted to take care of you, he admitted. Because I hate that you have to fight for everything. Because I... He stopped himself. But Riley had heard it. And it scared the hell out of her. Because if he had finished that sentence, if he had said what she thought he was about to say, then none of this would be fake anymore. She took a shaky breath, stepping back. I need to think. Leo's jaw tightened. Riley. No, she said, shaking her head. I need to think. Then, before she could second guess herself, she turned and walked out the door. And Leo let her go. The problem with leaving was that Riley had nowhere to go. Her apartment felt like a different life, and the auto shop, her safe place, was now a war zone, swarming with reporters hoping to catch a glimpse of the gold-digging wife. So she went to the only person she could trust, Mason. He opened the door, blinking in surprise. Well, if it isn't Mrs. Kensington. Riley shot him a look. Not funny. Mason stepped aside, letting her in. His place was a stark contrast to Leo's penthouse, small, cluttered, a little messy. It felt normal. She collapsed onto his couch with a sigh. I think I made a mistake. Mason leaned against the counter. Leaving or marrying Leo in the first place? Riley ran a hand through her hair. Both? Mason studied her for a moment. You love him. She jerked upright. Excuse me. You love him, Mason repeated, smirking. You just haven't admitted it yet. Riley scoffed. No, we had a deal. It's not. Mason raised an eyebrow. And just like that, her carefully built walls cracked. Because she did. God help her, she did. She had fallen for the one man she wasn't supposed to fall for. She groaned, dropping her head into her hands. I'm an idiot. Mason chuckled. Yeah, but at least you finally figured it out. She exhaled. What do I do? Mason's smirk faded slightly. You have two options. Walk away, pretend this never happened, or she looked up. Or what? He shrugged. Or you fight for it. Riley swallowed, because deep down she already knew what she wanted to do. 2 days later, she walked back into the penthouse. Leo was sitting in the dark, a glass of whiskey in his hand. When he saw her, he didn't move. I was wondering when you'd come back, he said, his voice rough. Riley stepped forward. You knew I would? He smirked humorlessly. I hoped. A beat of silence. Then Riley exhaled. I read the contract again. Leo frowned. And nowhere in there does it say you're allowed to make decisions for me, she said, crossing her arms. If we're doing this, it's as equals. No more secrets. No more protecting me like I'm some charity case. Leo studied her for a long moment. Then, finally, he nodded. All right. Oh, right? Yeah. Riley hesitated. And you're okay with that? His lips quirked. I'd rather have you mad at me than not have you at all. Her heart clenched. Damn him! Bam him! Damn this whole thing! She moved toward him, grabbing the whiskey from his hand and taking a sip. Then, before she could overthink it, she leaned down and kissed him. Leo froze for half a second before pulling her closer, his fingers tangling in her hair. This kiss wasn't like the wedding kiss. It wasn't a show. It wasn't a performance. It was real. And Riley had never been more terrified in her life. When they finally broke apart, Leo smirked. So I'm guessing that means you're staying? She rolled her eyes. For now? Leo grinned. Good enough for me. And just like that, everything changed. Riley Carter wasn't the type to second guess herself. She made decisions, stuck to them, and dealt with the consequences. But now, as she sat in the dimly lit penthouse, her fingers tracing the rim of an untouched glass of whiskey, she couldn't shake the unease sitting heavy in her chest. Leo was in his office dealing with yet another peer crisis thanks to Vanessa's little media stunt. She should have left him to handle it, should have just gone to bed and let it all blow over. But something in her gut told her this wasn't over. And she was right. Because when she picked up her phone, there was a new message. You should have stayed gone. Riley's blood ran cold. The unknown number, the warning, it wasn't just someone messing with her. It was a threat. And it wasn't just about the marriage anymore. This was personal. Leo found her standing on the balcony, arms crossed, staring out at the city like she was preparing for battle. He stepped beside her, hands in his pockets. You've been quiet. Riley didn't look at him. Got another text. Leo's entire body stiffened. What did it say? She handed him the phone. He read the message once, then twice, then exhaled slowly, like he was fighting the urge to break something. This isn't just about the press anymore, she said, her voice steady. Someone wants me out of your life. Leo's grip on the phone tightened. That's not happening. Riley turned to face him. Leo, be realistic. We knew this wasn't going to be easy, but I didn't sign up for this. His jaw clenched. You think I did? No, she admitted. But it's different for you. You grew up in this world. I didn't. Leo studied her for a long moment, something unreadable in his expression. Then, without a word, he pulled her into his arms. She stiffened at first, but when she felt the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her cheek, she let herself relax. I won't let anything happen to you, he murmured, his voice low and firm. Riley swallowed hard. You can't promise that? Leo pulled back slightly, just enough to look her in the eyes. I just did. And for the first time, she believed him. The next morning, Leo took action. Security was doubled. His legal team went after Vanessa with full force, and he hired a private investigator to track down the source of the messages. But Riley? She was done waiting for answers. So she did what she did best. She took matters into her own hands. Mason wasn't thrilled when she showed up at his bar, demanding information. Carter, I'm all for reckless decisions, but this, he gestured toward her phone, this is next level reckless.
Riley rolled her eyes. I'm not asking for permission, Mason. I'm asking if you know anyone who can trace this number. Mason exhaled. Riley. She raised an eyebrow. What? You do realize you're married to one of the most powerful men in the country, right? She crossed her arms. Your point? Mason leaned forward. My point is that Leo already has people handling this. You sneaking around trying to play detective? That's going to piss him off. Riley smirked. Good. Mason groaned. You're impossible. Yep. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Fine. I'll make some calls. Riley grinned. Knew I could count on you. Mason muttered something under his breath, but she didn't care. She wasn't going to sit around and play the helpless damsel. Whoever was trying to scare her, they had no idea who they were messing with. Leo found out. Of course he did. Riley barely made it back to the penthouse before he was there, pacing, his expression a mix of frustration and something else, something closer to fear. Are you out of your damn mind? He demanded the second she walked through the door. Riley shrugged, dropping her jacket onto the couch. Depends who you ask. Leo pinched the bridge of his nose. Riley, I'm not sorry. His head snapped up. You should be. She stepped closer. Why? Because I won't sit around and let someone threaten me. Because I refuse to play the part of your delicate billionaire wife. Leo's jaw tightened. Because I almost lost you once, and I won't let that happen again. Riley froze. She hadn't expected that. Leo exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. You don't get it, do you? If something happens to you, Riley, he stopped himself, shaking his head. I can't let that happen. Her throat felt tight. Leo. He stepped forward, so close she could feel the warmth of him. You drive me insane, you know that. She smirked. Good. Leo let out a short laugh, but the intensity in his eyes never wavered. Then, before she could process what was happening, he reached up and cupped her face, his thumb brushing against her cheek. And just like that, the world stopped. Promise me something, he murmured. Riley swallowed hard. What? Next time you do something reckless, he said. His voice softer now. Let me do it with you. She hesitated. Then, slowly she nodded. Okay. Leo's lips quirked. Good. And then he kissed her. Not like before. Not for show. Not because of a contract. But because he wanted to. Because they both did. She stepped closer. Why? Because I won't sit around and let someone threaten me? Because I refuse to play the part of your delicate billionaire wife? Leo's jaw tightened. Because I almost lost you once, and I won't let that happen again. Riley froze. She hadn't expected that. Leo exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. You don't get it, do you? If something happens to you, Riley, he stopped himself, shaking his head. I can't let that happen. Her throat felt tight. Leo. He stepped forward so close she could feel the warmth of him. You drive me insane, you know that. She smirked. Good. Leo let out a short laugh, but the intensity in his eyes never wavered. Then, before she could process what was happening, he reached up and cupped her face, his thumb brushing against her cheek. And just like that, the world stopped. Promise me something, he murmured. Riley swallowed hard. What? Next time you do something reckless, he said, his voice softer now. Let me do it with you. She hesitated. Then, slowly, she nodded. Okay. Leo's lips quirked. Good. And then he kissed her. Not like before. Not for show. Yeah. Not because of a contract, but because he wanted to. 'Cause they both did.
And for the first time since this whole mess started, Riley stopped pretending. Because the truth was, she was already his. She had been from the start. Leo Kensington was used to winning. Every deal, every negotiation, every battle. He played to win. He didn't lose. Not in business. Not in life. But as he sat across from his father in the towering boardroom of Kensington Holdings, he had the sinking realization that for the first time he was about to walk away from something that had been his entire world. You have a choice, Leo, Richard Kensington said, his voice calm, controlled. End this arrangement with Riley, and everything remains as it should. Or he leaned back, his sharp eyes assessing his son like he was just another investment. Stay with her, and you'll no longer be my heir. Leo clenched his jaw, the weight of his father's words settling over him like a goddamn execution sentence. This was it. The moment he had been waiting for. The moment he had spent years preparing to avoid. His father had never cared about love. He had always treated marriage like a merger, something that should serve the family name, not personal feelings. And Riley? She wasn't part of the plan. Leo exhaled sharply. You're serious? Richard folded his hands together. You know me well enough to know I don't make empty threats. Leo did know. His father was ruthless. He built an empire with cold precision, never once making a decision based on anything other than logic. And that was exactly why Leo had spent his entire life trying to be that person. Until Riley. Until the woman who was never supposed to mean anything had become everything. Leo leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Let me get this straight. You're willing to throw away your own son, your own blood, because I refuse to be manipulated into another one of your perfect business deals. Richard arched an eyebrow. I'm not throwing you away, Leo. You are making the choice. I built this company from the ground up, and I need an heir who understands that sacrifices must be made for the greater good. Leo let out a humorless laugh. You mean sacrifices like love? Happiness? Richard didn't blink. Yes. Silence filled the room. Leo stared at the man who had shaped him, who had taught him everything about power, control, and ambition. And he realized in that moment that he didn't want to be his father. Not anymore. Without another word, he pushed back his chair and stood. Richard's eyes darkened. Leo, I'm done, Leo said, voice calm but firm. If keeping Riley means walking away from all of this, he gestured around the boardroom at the empire his father had built. Then consider this my resignation. For the first time, Richard Kensington's expression faltered. You'd throw away everything. Leo met his father's gaze, unwavering. And with that, he turned and walked out. For the first time in his life, Leo Kensington wasn't walking toward power. He was walking toward something real, toward her. Riley was in the middle of reorganizing the auto shop's inventory when she heard the bell over the door chime. I swear, if it's another damn reporter, I'm... She stopped mid-sentence when she turned around. Leo stood in the doorway, wearing the same damn suit he had left in that morning. But now it was slightly disheveled, his tie loosened, his expression unreadable. And he was staring at her like she was the only thing keeping him upright. Riley's stomach twisted. Leo. He exhaled, stepping forward. I did it. Her brow furrowed. Did what? I walked away. She blinked. From what? Leo let out a breathless chuckle. From everything. Riley's heart pounded. She stepped closer, searching his face. What are you talking about? My father. The company. The inheritance. All of it. His voice was steady, but there was something raw beneath it. He gave me an ultimatum. You or the family legacy. Riley's throat tightened. And you. I chose you. The words landed between them, heavy and irrevocable. Riley felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Leo. He shook his head, taking another step forward, crowding her space. I don't regret it, Riley. His voice was quiet, but there was a fire in his eyes. I don't regret any of it. She swallowed hard, every emotion crashing into her at once. You? I love you. The words stopped her heart. Leo's jaw tightened, his fingers flexing like he wanted to reach for her, but was holding himself back. I love you, and I know this wasn't the plan. I know we weren't supposed to be this. But damn it, Riley, I'd rather lose everything than lose you. Her breath caught. Leo, you. I don't care about the contract, or the deal, or any of it. His voice turned rough. I just care about us. Riley's vision blurred, her chest so full she thought she might burst. Because this was real. Not a contract. Not a performance. Just them. And it had always been enough. She inhaled sharply. You idiot. Leo blinked. Excuse me. Riley let out a watery laugh, stepping into his space, gripping his lapels. You gave up an empire for me? He smirked, his hands settling on her waist. No, I gave up an empire for us. And just like that, she kissed him. Hard. Fierce. Desperate. Because she didn't need a contract or a fake marriage or a billionaire name to tell her what she already knew. Leo Kensington was hers. And she was his. Forever. Riley had never imagined herself as the kind of woman who got a real proposal. Not the kind that came with a contract. Not the kind that was wrapped up in business deals and family expectations. A real one. But as she stood on the rooftop of their penthouse, the city skyline stretching out behind Leo, she realized that this moment, was the one she had never dared to dream about. Leo was down on one knee, holding out a ring that caught the golden glow of the setting sun. And for the first time in her life, Riley Carter was speechless. She stared at him, her heart hammering. "Leo, what the hell are you doing?" He smirked. That's usually obvious when a guy is on one knee. She huffed out a laugh, but it came out shaky. "I mean, why this? Why now?" Leo's expression softened. "Because I should have done this a long time ago." Her throat tightened. She had never been the type to dream about fairy tale endings. She had spent her life being practical, independent, never waiting for someone else to hand her happiness. But Leo? He had changed everything. He had made her want things she'd never let herself want before. She exhaled sharply. "Leo, you don't have to." "I want to." His voice was steady, his eyes locked onto hers. "Riley, I never thought I'd want this. Hell, I never thought I'd want any of it. But then you came crashing into my life, making everything complicated and messy and real, and I don't want a life without you in it." Her breath caught. Leo took her hand, his fingers threading through hers. "I don't care what my last name is. I don't care about the company, the money, any of it. None of it means anything without you." Riley swallowed hard, her eyes stinging. "You're serious?" Leo smirked. "You're the only thing I've ever been completely serious about." She let out a shaky laugh. "God, you're such a sap." His grin widened. "Only for you, Carter." Her heart twisted. And just like that, she knew. She had known it for a while now, but this made it undeniable. She loved him. She needed him. And she wasn't about to let him go. Riley exhaled, shaking her head. "You know, if you told me a year ago I'd be standing here marrying a billionaire, I would have laughed in your face." Leo chuckled. "If you told me a year ago I'd be down on one knee for a grease-covered mechanic, I would have laughed too." She smirked. "Careful, Kensington." "Why?" "You gonna say no?" Riley bit her lip, then glanced at the ring. It wasn't some gaudy, oversized rock meant to show off wealth. It was elegant, simple. Something he had picked, knowing exactly what she'd want, without her even saying it. That was the thing about Leo. He knew her. All the messy, complicated, stubborn parts of her. And he still chose her, just like she would always choose him. She met his gaze, her pulse racing. Then, finally, she whispered, "Yes." Leo's face broke into the kind of grin that could ruin a woman. And before she could say anything else, he was standing, pulling her into his arms, kissing her like she was the only thing that mattered. Because she was. The wedding was nothing like the first one. There were no press cameras, no business deals, no pretending. Just them. It was held at the lake house, just close friends and family. Mason stood as Leo's best man, grinning like he had somehow known this was going to happen all along. Zara helped Riley into her dress, which, much to everyone's surprise, wasn't covered in oil stains. Even Leo's mother, Evelyn, had tears in her eyes as she watched her son stand at the altar, waiting for Riley, like he had been waiting for her his entire life. And maybe he had. Maybe they had both been waiting for each other. When Riley walked down the aisle, Leo was watching her like she had hung the damn stars in the sky. And this time, when they said their vows, there was no script, no contract, no deadline, just forever. And when Leo kissed her, Riley knew she had never belonged anywhere more than she did right here in his arms. As his wife, Riley Carter Kensington had never been afraid of change. She had spent her entire life adapting, fighting, surviving. Change was inevitable. It was the only constant she knew. But as she sat on the edge of the massive bed in their penthouse, staring at the little white stick in her hand, she realized some changes still had the power to shake her to her core. The second pink line stared back at her, bold, undeniable. She was pregnant. A laugh bubbled up in her throat, half disbelief, half hysteria. Holy hell! She had never thought about kids, had never imagined herself as the type of woman who settled down with a husband and a baby. And yet, here she was, married, in love, and now, carrying his child. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the test on the nightstand. She had no idea how to tell Leo. Scratch that. She had no idea how he was going to react. Leo Kensington wasn't just her husband. He was a man who had spent his entire life avoiding attachment, dodging expectations, never allowing anyone to get too close. She knew he loved her. God, she knew. But a baby? That was different. That was permanent. She sucked in a breath, steadying herself. There was only one way to find out. Leo was in his office, sleeves rolled up, fingers flying over the keyboard as he closed out a deal. He looked up when she walked in, immediately sensing something was off. Riley? His brows furrowed. What's wrong? She exhaled, stepping forward. I need to tell you something. Leo sat back in his chair, his gaze sharpening. Okay. Riley bit her lip, suddenly nervous. This was ridiculous. She wasn't the nervous type. She wasn't. Just say it. She took a deep breath and blurted out, I'm pregnant. Silence. Leo didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. Riley's stomach twisted. Say something. He just stared at her, his mind clearly racing 1,000,000 miles a minute. Then, suddenly, he stood. And before she could react, he was crossing the room, grabbing her face between his hands, kissing her so hard it stole her breath. Riley's heart stopped. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were shining, actually shining. You're pregnant, he murmured, as if saying it out loud would make it more real. Riley swallowed. Yeah. Leo exhaled sharply, then let out a laugh, one that was completely, utterly disbelieving. And then he picked her up. Leo, she squeaked, wrapping her arms around his neck as he spun her around. I'm going to be a dad, he breathed, pressing his forehead against hers. You're having my baby. She grinned. Yeah, I kind of figured that part out. He let out another shaky laugh, setting her down, but keeping her close. His hand slid down to her stomach. resting there like he could already feel the life growing inside her. His expression turned serious. "I swear to you, Riley," he said, voice rough with emotion, "I'm going to take care of you." Her chest ached. "I know." And she did, because Leo Kensington had never been a man to make empty promises. 9 months later, Leo Kensington discovered something he hadn't thought possible. He had thought he knew what it meant to be afraid. He had faced boardrooms of ruthless billionaires, had walked away from his family's empire, had risked everything for love. But none of it compared to the sheer, gut-wrenching terror of watching Riley scream in pain, gripping his hand like she was trying to break it as she brought their child into the world. "Breathe, Carter," he urged, brushing damp hair from her forehead. "You've got this." She glared at him, eyes wild. "I swear to God, Kensington, if you tell me to breathe one more time, I'm going to break your face." Leo bit back a grin. "Noted." The doctor's voice cut through the chaos. "One more push, Riley. You're almost there." Riley let out a growl that honestly scared him a little. And then the sound of a baby's cry filled the room. Leo felt his heart stop. The doctor lifted the tiny, squirming infant, and Riley gasped, her entire body going limp with exhaustion. "It's a girl," the doctor announced. Leo was pretty sure his knees were about to give out. "A daughter." The nurse handed the baby to Riley, and for the first time in his life, Leo Kensington was utterly, completely helpless. Because she was perfect. Riley was crying. "Leo, look at her." He did. And in that moment, something inside him cracked wide open. He had never understood what people meant when they talked about unconditional love, had never known what it felt like to have something, someone, so precious that he would burn the world down to protect it. Until now. His voice came out hoarse. "She's beautiful." Riley smiled tiredly. "She looks like you." Leo let out a breathless laugh, running a gentle finger over the baby's impossibly small hand. "Poor kid." Riley snorted. "Right." Leo bent down, pressing a kiss to Riley's forehead, then to their daughters. "I love you," he whispered. Riley looked up at him, her eyes filled with something that made his chest ache. "I love you too." Leo exhaled, feeling the weight of everything settle over him. He had spent his life chasing power, control, success. But this was everything. 3 years later, Leo Kensington sat on the beach, watching his wife chase their daughter through the sand. Little Stella Kensington shrieked with laughter, her tiny feet kicking up sand as she ran toward the water. Riley scooped her up just before she reached the waves, spinning her around as she giggled. Leo leaned back, watching them, his heart so full he thought it might burst. A small hand tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy," Stella whispered, climbing onto his lap. Leo grinned. "Yeah, baby?" She pointed toward Riley. "Mommy said I can have a puppy." Leo shot Riley a look. She smirked. "Don't fight it, Kensington." Leo sighed dramatically. "I never win against you, do I?" Riley kissed his cheek. "Nope." He chuckled, wrapping his arms around his daughter, pressing a kiss to her hair. And in that moment, surrounded by the two people he loved more than anything in the world, Leo Kensington realized he had won after all. Because this was the only victory that had ever mattered. And he would never let it go. Thank you for sticking around until the very end of this story. It means a lot to have you here, sharing this journey with us. At its core, this story isn't just about a billionaire and a mechanic falling in love. It's about choice. The choice to fight for what matters, to defy expectations, and to embrace the kind of love that doesn't come with conditions or contracts. Life isn't always about power, money, or reputation. It's about the people who stand beside you when everything else falls apart. It's about the ones who make you laugh, who challenge you, and who love you even when you don't think you deserve it. So, if there's one lesson to take from this story, let it be this. Love isn't something you negotiate. It's something you fight for. And when you find it, hold on, because it's worth more than anything in the world. Now, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let me know. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new video. See you in the next one.